Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Chris Strawn here, Lazy Love Hunting Club. Thank you for joining us. We're going to have a good discussion today with starting a new 10-week series, or 10 podcast series to be more precise. It's going to be a deep examination of leadership and the legacy that comes from leaders.
Yeah.
And to help us with the leadership discussion today is an expert in his own right on leadership, Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch. Good day, sir.
How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. Joining us also is going to be Lazy Lab co-founder and president CEO, Matthew Michelson. Hello, Commander.
Hey, Chris. Hey, Oak. Good afternoon from Pac Northwest. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's good to have you all here. So we're going to get right into this. Oak, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what makes you qualified to kind of lead the discussion on leadership?
Yeah, well, I think all of us on here can probably be qualified to lead a discussion on leadership. So I've been a leader for over 40 plus years. I did 23 years in the Army as a combat arms officer, many leadership positions. And then when I retired from the Army after 23 years, after retiring as a lieutenant colonel, then I ran the day-to-day operations of a food bank that covered 52 counties over 3 states along the Gulf Coast, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Panhandle of Florida. And then I did that for a couple of years. And then now I'm a government service officer where I've lead a bunch of cadets, helping to produce a bunch of cadets into lieutenants for the United States Army. And I've been doing that for almost 13 years now, 12 years. And I've written a book, Your Leadership Legacy, Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be. And I'm out on the speaking circuit now, talking to universities, corporations, conferences of all types about leadership and what good leaders do and what leadership means.
That makes sense. What would you say, though, to somebody who might say, I appreciate your military service and, yay for that, but how does that translate to talking to business leaders or sports teams leaders or nonprofit leaders? How does that translate for those of us that don't know?
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer that leadership is leadership. It doesn't matter where you learned it, doesn't matter where you practiced it, because leadership is about people, period. Simple. That's it. If you understand that leadership is about people, you can lead any organization. And I'm a perfect example of that. 23 years as a combat arms officer in the Army, successful in that career. And then when I ran the food bank, the day-to-day operation of the food bank, when I took over that food bank, we were handing out 1.2 million pounds of food a year. When I left, we were handing out 3.8 million pounds.
So a little bit more.
The size of the trucking fleet, and I increased the size of the workforce. It's about people. If you know how to lead people, you can lead any organization.
That makes sense. Before we progress too much further on defining on how your leadership skills are malleable to other situations, let's first decide what is a core definition of leadership. I imagine it's kind of like something kind of like beauty, when you see it. But how would you define what leadership actually is?
Yeah, I think what leadership is a couple different things. I think a couple ingredients go in there to make a good leader. Number one, I'm a firm believer in servant leadership, that it's about the people and about empowering people to be the best people they can be. If you do that, if you empower your people, train them, coach them, develop them, and then empower them, now you're using their skills, you're using their knowledge and their talent to accomplish a mission. And that's really what leaders do, is they influence people, to motivate and influence people to accomplish a mission, whatever that mission is, a task, a job, whatever you want to call it. Because in the end, it is important to get results, but it isn't your job necessarily as the leader to get the job done. It's to motivate, influence, and use the people that are in your organization to make that happen. So that's one way I define leadership, is taking care of your people, motivating them, training them, influencing them to get jobs done. I think the number one job of a leader, in my opinion, the number one job is to develop the culture of that organization. And that takes time, effort, money. I was talking to a young man who started a business and it was starting to grow. I don't know, probably about 6 months ago, maybe 7. And he said to me, we were talking about culture. And I said, developing the culture of your organization is going to take you some time and money and resources and training. And he looked at me and he said, "Nope, Colonel McCulloch, you're wrong." And I said, "What?" He said, "Nope, all I got to do is hire the right people." I said, "Good luck with that, young man. We'll see how that works for you."
That's a bold thing for a definitely relatively uninformed gentleman to say to you. Like, I recognize your expertise, but this is the fact. And so how did it go for him?
I mean, certainly you got to hire the right people that meet what you want in your culture. But the problem is that people come with lots of different ideas and lots of different values and what their views of what things should be. And if you're going to build a culture, a true culture in your organization, what you want your organization to be every day as you're moving along that vision and that plan of where you want to be, then you got to teach people what it is that your culture is, and you got to train them that way. Because if you don't, then you're going to get what you get, and it won't be what you want. I promise.
Matt, how does that relate to you and your command and to your experience running, be it your section of the your daily work in the Navy versus with Lazy Lab Hunting Club? How does that correspond to what you believe about leadership?
Well, wow, Chris. Yeah, there's a lot to that question. I definitely agree with what Colonel is saying about setting the stage for the culture, right? I would disagree with the young man who said to the Colonel that I just need to hire the right people. I don't believe that at all. I think in order to be a successful leader as well as a successful manager, that you have to first embody what the culture it is that you are trying to you have to exemplify the culture that is important to you and whatever your mission set is. I think it's very difficult to change a culture within a military context. I would argue that commands have been defined and realized for a number of years. So it's hard for a new, say, second lieutenant or even an 04, 05 to come in and change the culture. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm saying that it's difficult and it does absolutely take time. And that translates as well to any sort of civilian institution. If you're the new guy or gal coming in, the new leader, and you have positional authority, well, just because you have positional authority, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a leader. A leader, like the Colonel just said, it takes time. You have to invest in your people. You have to show people that you truly care about them, and thus empowering them to complete the mission of the organization. Leadership
So I guess that goes back to the servant leadership that the Colonel mentioned previously. That Colonel, do you believe that the day-to-day operations of your command or of your group is going to reflect the ethics and the morals of the leaders?
Absolutely, they will. I mean, you set the example. I'm a firm believer that you got to set the example every day, because every day people are watching you. And if you don't believe they're watching you, you're pretty naive, because they are. They're watching everything you do. Yeah. And so you got to set the example in everything you do every day. And it's not always easy, but you got to do that. And that part of that goes to the trust that you got to build, because that leader-led relationship doesn't exist without trust. Just like Matt said, if you may have the title of being the leader, But if they don't trust you, you're not really the leader. They may have to do what you tell them to do because you're the boss, but they don't trust you. They're not going to go that extra mile. They're not going to do those extra things that somebody who trusts you that knows you really care about them. They're going to trust you and they're going to do those extra things. So it's about people, building that trust with people. And there's easy ways to do that. We have just forgotten a lot of those things.
Yeah. Are these nuggets of wisdom the same for a small team versus a big team versus
Yeah, I think it is, because I don't care how high up you get. Let's use the military, for example. A 4-star general, he isn't leading 50,000 people on a day-to-day basis. He's got to set the example. He's the leader, but he's not personally leading 50,000 soldiers or sailors or airmen or Marines. He's leading 4 to 5 people, maybe 10. Then they're leading 4 to 5 people. Then they're leading 4 to 5 people. And so I think no matter what size organization you're talking about, leadership is the same. It's just how you delegate things, how you disseminate things. And the way you do that is through subordinate leaders that then have subordinate leaders who then have people working for them in whatever organization it is. So I don't think it changes. I don't think the principles change. How you implement them and how you get your information out to people changes a little bit. When I was a platoon leader, I called my platoon together, 32 guys. That was easy. When I was a company commander and I had 375 people in my company, not so easy. When a division commander that's got 20,000 people, he can't call everybody together and talk to them every day. So it's how you get your information out. The principles are the same. It's just how you disseminate that information.
Mm-hmm. Matt, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, Chris, I do agree with what the Colonel is saying. It's very how one leads, I think, is dependent upon the values in which they were raised and the environment that they were raised. How you get your leadership philosophy out to the men and women who are subordinate to you, whether it be in positionally and or otherwise. I think it's how. Really, Chris, and I may be a little long-winded when I say this, but I truly believe that you have to first, as a leader of any organization, you have to understand who is working for you, who is either volunteered or who is on a paid staff, and how do they operate? How do they receive information? Like the Colonel said, it could be through email, it could be through text, it could be verbal communication, but how do they absorb and digest information so that they can hopefully better do their job and you guys continue on in the mission? So I really do believe that leadership, yes, it's inspiring individuals, it's influencing folks for the better in order to empower them, but really you as the leader, as the man or woman thrust into that role, you have to understand how do those under you, how do they absorb information, how do they communicate, and then you as the leader have to reach out to them on their level to understand how it's readily accepted, right? Because if I'm talking to a junior sailor and I'm sending 1 million emails a day, but he doesn't have time to read email because he's down, on the deck plates or in the engine room, he doesn't have access to the communication, to the information. Maybe I do need to get out of the office and get down into the engine room and look at him one-on-one and say, this is what we need to do. This is, how can I help you do your job? And I think that's going back to the discussion of servant leadership as well, from what Oak was saying. Hey, we're a faith-based organization, right? We're doing this podcast show and this discussion on a faith-based conduit, if you will. The greatest example of servant leadership and influence over people was Christ, right? So Christ called the 12 disciples. He said, come follow me. Hey, get used to being different, as they say in the Chosen show. There's a great example there of how to influence others for the positive. And again, going back, we're called to be like Christ as believers, right? It all starts with servant leadership. And I think going back to Oak's initial point, that's where we start. We start at who was the greatest servant leader in the history of mankind? It was Christ. And how do we emulate his leadership 2,000 years ago, and how do we apply it still to our lives today?
I agree. But one of the things that, and then you touched on it, is the only way you're going to figure out all those things about the people who work for you, who you're in charge of, who you're the leader of, and have the privilege of leading, is to get to know them. If you don't get to know the people in your organization, or the people you have, if you know, depending on how high up you get, you're not going to know everybody in your organization, but you got to know the people who you have that direct influence on. Then you can't figure out what it is that they need to help motivate them. And I always tell all these young lieutenants that I'm sending out that we commission, and we commissioned 62 of them last year out of our program. I always tell them, go out every day and find one person in your organization and find out something new about them. Not something about work, some personal information, their spouse's name, their children's names, what sports do their children play? What are their hobbies? Find something new about that one person every day, and you'll start seeing trust just start going through the roof, because now they start understanding that you actually care, that you're asking them questions. And don't call them into your office to do that. Go out where they're working, just like you said, Matt. Go out where they're working and talk to them and figure out something new about them, that you care. Show them that you care about them.
That seems very insightful to me. That's a good idea. I hate to turn a little bit past sunshine and lollipops, but it's not always sunshine and lollipops. What happens when you get to a position where the servant leader thing needs to be, well, I mean, Christ went to the temple, he turned over tables. He scolded the disciples for falling asleep when they should have been praying. So how do you translate the servant leadership into discipline, into right order, into
Well, I think that's one of the big misconceptions about servant leadership, is that you're always doing exactly what people want. And that's not the case. Servant leaders you have your people's best interest at heart. What they want isn't always their best interest. And so you got to remember that your job is to empower them, make them better. And sometimes that isn't what they want, but it is what's best for them. But I think, you got to get back to, as a leader, you have to give feedback, good and bad. And, it's easy to give good feedback. You walk up to somebody on the back, say, great job. Everybody likes that, and everybody likes to do that. The hard part is when you got to give somebody some negative feedback. You're not meeting the standard. Well, in my opinion, a boss will tell you, you're not meeting the standards, fix it. A servant leader, a good leader, will walk up and say, hey, Matt, you're not meeting the standard. Here's why. Here's what the standard is. This is what you're doing, so that you're not meeting the standard. And here's how we're going to fix it. And you come up with a plan and walk them through, okay, over the next month, 3 months, 6 months, year, however long you want to go, these are the things we're going to do to retrain you to get you to where you can meet the standard. So I think, again, the misconception with servant leader is that you're always a nice person and that you're always doing whatever they want to do. And that is not the case. You have to sometimes be the bad guy, and you sometimes have to make them do things that they don't want to do, because in the end, it's about empowering them to make them better. And the only way you're going to do that is make them do what they got to do.
Mm-hmm. Matt, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I agree with what the colonel's saying. Being a servant leader doesn't mean you are meek and you don't acquiesce to the desires of everyone in the organization, right? You, as a leader within any organization, you are called to, ensure the health and wellness of that organization and the mission in which it why it operates. But again, we do care about our people. And I agree with the fact that if someone is not living up to the expectation or the culture that the organization embodies and endears, well, then you need to help and have that. Help that individual kind of get back on track. And if that's holding their hand for 3 months, 6 months, if it means providing them with a little more training or a little love, then so be it. If you care about the organization, if you care about that individual, a servant leader will go the extra mile to ensure that individual is brought along successfully. But again, just like believers, right? We're not called to be meek individuals. We're actually called, it's biblical to, a great example, you pray from a position of authority. Well, as a servant leader, you maintain your position of authority, caring for people, following Christ's example. But that doesn't mean you acquiesce to the desire of everyone, just like Christ. He didn't acquiesce to the desires of the teachers of the law, to Rome, all that good stuff. So,
Colonel, you mentioned the position of having to tell someone something they might not want to hear, or that they need more training in XYZ, or they need to take these next steps over the next X number of months to get themselves in the organization where they need to be. Do you then just pat them on the back and say, go get it done? Or do you follow up with them periodically through the process to make sure to do stage checks? Or is it, have at it?
Yeah, so I think you have, as a leader, you have to be involved in that. If you're coming up with the plan of how you're going to fix the problem, then first of all, I think it has to be in writing. And I think that when you counsel that person, when you're talking to that person about not meeting the standards and this is what we're going to do, I would encourage you not to be in your office. Or if you're in your office, not you behind the desk and them on the other side of the desk. Got to be where you're face to face, where there's not a whole lot of stuff in between you guys or gals, and you're again a person. I'm a person talking to another person. Now, just like Matt said, you got to keep that leader-led relationship, even when you're learning about people. You still got to keep that. But I think you put it in writing. These are the steps we're going to take. Every week we're going to meet and talk about it. This is the training you're going to do. And if there's some training that they got to do, some physical training, then you need to show up to it. Do you have to be there the entire time to retrain? No. But I think if you want them to think that you really take it seriously, then you got to show a presence there at least some of the time to show them that it's important to you as well as it is to them. So I think it isn't a hands-off thing. Once you come up with that plan, you got to be involved in it. Make sure they understand the onus is on them. They got to want to get better, want to meet the standard, but you have to help them do that. If they didn't need your help doing it, they'd be doing it now. So what would make you think as a leader that all I got to do is tell you what it is and you're going to make it happen? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm taking from the conversation here is that the principles and the rationales of leadership, of being a servant leader, are applicable inside and outside the military, and inside and outside of for-profit versus nonprofit, and that those lessons are applicable pretty much anywhere you can use leadership skills.
I do believe that. I believe that you do have to tweak your message, how you give your message, just like Matt said. I mean, when I'm talking to a bunch of combat soldiers, it's a little bit different than talking to a bunch of volunteers at the food bank. So you got to figure out your audience and how to get that message across. And it's certainly different depending on what your audience is. The principles don't change, but how you communicate what you want done is absolutely going to change. And it may change inside your organization. Just like Matt said, one person might receive things a lot easier by email. Some people want face-to-face. Some people want a text message. You got to figure that out. And the only way you're going to figure that out is to get to know the people in your organization.
That's this wasn't on our talking points or the show plan, but one difficulty that I've had in leadership roles in nonprofits especially is getting people to comply with their commitments and getting people to live up to the level that they're going to be at.
Yeah.
Because you have a title of authority, you have positional authority, and you may even have experiential authority, but you don't have any power to do anything to those below you if they don't meet the goal.
Yeah.
So what say you about that?
So I think again, that goes back to motivating people and influencing people, but certainly motivating people. And I always tell people, if you want to motivate people, the first thing you have to do is figure out what what gives them a sense of purpose, because that's why people do things. Now, I got it. There are some people who do things just for a paycheck, and that's okay as long as they're doing their job. I don't care. But most people don't do things just for a paycheck. That's not what motivates people. It is a sense of purpose. We all want a sense of purpose in everything we do, whether it's our job, our relationship, our hobby, whatever it is. So you got to figure out what gives them their sense of purpose. And one of the ways I'm a fan of doing that, figuring out what their sense of purpose is. Number one, getting to know them personally. And number two, figuring out what makes your organization unique. And especially if you're talking about nonprofit, where somebody picked your nonprofit to come to work. They could have picked a bunch of them, but they picked yours. So whatever it is that made your organization unique is probably what is motivating them. So you got to bring that out and keep emphasizing what it is that's making you unique. Make your organization that make the picture that you paint for them every day. This is what our organization is about, and this is your role in getting us where we have to be. Mm-hmm. And you got to make it personal like that. Say, everybody on this team has a role. Here's the vision, here's the plan of where we want to be, but you are the ones that are going to get us there. It's not going to be me as the leader. Here's your role. And when I go around and talk to companies, I always go down to the lowest person in the company and I say, what's the vision and the plan for the company? And lots of times they can tell me that, sometimes they can't. And then I ask them, what's your role in it? And if they can't tell me their role in that vision and the plan, we got problems.
Interesting. That's a good idea for nonprofits and for where there's not a whole lot of authority to make someone's life a little more difficult if they don't do their thing.
Yeah, like I said, I was a leader in a food bank nonprofit dealing with employees and volunteers and the community, because a lot of your support comes from the community.
Yeah.
The food bank, we didn't grow our own food; it came from other places. So you got to have that influence by that motivate people to want to help your organization. And again, I think it goes back to what makes your organization unique. That's the key to motivating people.
So I guess wrapping it up there, if we want to have something to refer to, some sort of authoritative guide on such things like this, where might you point people? Matt, do you have anything in your hand right now that might be applicable to that?
I have no shame. I would absolutely point individuals who aspire to learn more about leadership and its practical application. This is why we're here as well. I'm a big fan of the Colonel. I love his book, Your Leadership Legacy. It's been influential in my life. I would encourage everyone to pick up, a copy, and the Colonel can tell you a little bit more about where to go. That's easiest for you. I love this book coupled with the Bible, I think, are two great pieces of literature that'll help you build your own leadership legacy, Chris.
That's what a coincidence. Do you happen to have that right there with you at that time? That's fantastic. So, Colonel, is there anything dated in the book? Is there anything that we're gonna read this and say that's last decade? Is there?
No.
Or is this just
again? Anybody who tells you they figured out something new about leadership, run away. Because there's nothing new about leadership. It's been the same since crisis time. Leadership is leadership. And I always worry about somebody who walks up to me and says, I found this new great secret about leadership. Let's get away from me. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's anything in there. And in the book, I don't talk about theory at all, because theory is important. And if you really want to be a leader, then at some point you're going to have to learn some theory stuff. But in the book is everyday things that everyday leaders can do to improve not only their leadership ability, skills, but also to improve the people in their organization. What things you can walk away with and start doing tomorrow. And so that was the goal of my book, was to make it and I've had people who have shown me my book when I'm on a Zoom with them or whatever, and it's highlighted, it's tabbed, they say they keep it on their desk and they read it just about every day. So.
Yeah, mine's the same. I got the tabs and the highlights. Good job, Matt. I got some too. I got some right there.
Yeah.
We're not interviewing Colonel McCulloch because he wants to sell books. That's not the point here. Yeah. He's affiliated with Lazy Lab Hunting Club. He's one of our core founding staff members. He's helping us. He's involved, and he's an authority on leadership. And leadership is what we want to exude. We want to be leaders. We want to show other people how to be leaders. And he happens to be an expert on the subject. So this isn't a book sales tactic. This isn't that. This is just talking to a guy who knows his stuff about what we want to learn about. So there's no financial interest in this discussion or in this or in this podcast series. And that's why we're doing a whole series on it, because there's a lot to learn. And there's many different subjects inside the leadership, and Colonel McCulloch is the expert on these. So it's we'd be crazy not to take advantage of his knowledge with this.
Well, I appreciate that, Chris.
Section. Yeah. Closing thoughts? Anything you guys want to say in closing?
Yeah. So I think you got to figure out what a leader is to you, and I think Matt hit it right on the head when between Christ and between being a servant leader like Christ. I mean, none of us can be like that, obviously, but you got to strive to be as good as you can. But it all goes back to servant leadership. Take care of the people that you work for, because that's what leadership is about, at least servant leadership. It's not about you. It's about taking care of the people in your organization. And I think we'll hit that one next podcast.
Okay, great. Matt, anything you want to close with?
The last thing I'm going to say is that leadership is hard. Colonel, as you talk about on the last page of chapter 1 of your book, you talk about, being a leader and being under the microscope every single day, right? People are going to look at you and say, hey, how did the Colonel react to this situation? What's he doing in his everyday life? How does he speak to me as the subordinate in the organization? Everything that you do is under a microscope as a leader. Leadership is hard. And we're going to talk about this throughout the 10 chapter series, is that, all the nuances of being a leader. Again, we'll talk about more of those as we go along, but you have to strive for perfection. And that is incredibly difficult. You look at the book of Luke, he says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. That is a hard command.
Yeah.
And so we will never, even at the end of this 10 chapter series, we will never become that perfect leader, but we can strive to be a better leader for the men and women that we serve, just like Christ served, us. So that's the last thing I would say, Chris, is that leadership is hard. It takes practice. It's repetition every single day. And so if you want to be that better leader, you've got to make the effort on a daily basis to strive to be that better leader. That's all.
Absolutely. What you have to do is not that hard. It's doing it is what's hard. Waking up every morning and say, I'm going to set the example today. I'm going to do the right thing, no matter what. That is the hard part.
Mm-hmm. So I hope you guys will join the installment of this podcast. It's not about you. It's all about you. And we would encourage you to please like, share, subscribe, go to lazylovehc.org/give. and support us. We operate only on the generosity of others. We're a completely unpaid staff, and it's our pleasure to serve. We need money to do what we got to do. So lazylovehc.org/give will be the place to do that at. Gentlemen, thank you for your time this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, and we hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Matt.